that when you give up your own mind to the state, then you find strength because now you are united with everybody else. You've been merged into the great collective. And the key to this, and this is, I think, Orwell's best point in the whole book. I think his best point is this. The key to this is the pushing of subjectivism, the pushing of the idea that you can create reality within your own mind. And this is what is constantly being pushed by O'Brien. O'Brien, of course, is the emissary of the state.
You can create reality within your own mind. That is the thing. Oh, this is so true. Like people live in their own realities. This is Alan Watts. The person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about but thoughts, so they live in a world of illusions.
Yeah, it's called Tankies.
This is the U.S. intelligence agency, mind control.
And so a lot of what Orwell is writing about is regime. And while he sort of lumps all theme together, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Oceania or East Asia or Eurasia.
That's the name, Oceania.
What he means by that is that once you have a totalitarian regime, whether it considers itself Nazi or whether it considers itself communist, you're now in the same boat. Now, there are some fundamental distinctions between these ideologies that I think that Orwell elides, but his ability to critique totalitarianism is unparalleled, which is why 1984 stands the test of time. And there's no question, by the way, that many of the incidents in 1984 are attempts to draw from real life. So, for example, there's this character of Parsons, right, who is this sort of fat, bloated idiot who lives in Winston's apartment building. And he's very excited that his kids are informing on all the neighbors. They're constantly informing on all the neighbors. Well, this was a thing in the Soviet Union under Stalin.
Gee, I wonder when this is. Let's see. 1 year ago, man, and we're already at the point where we're looking at people turning in parents for trans kids.
And I wonder who's at the very head of that.
Oh, it couldn't be the
Ben
Daily
Shapiro.
Wire.
No,
the Daily Wire, really? Wow, they haven't read 1984.
How interesting.
You know what I'm saying?
No.
Very, very famous situation where a kid named Pavel Morozov was a 13-year-old boy, and Pavel Morozov supposedly informed on his own father to the GPU, which was the predecessor to the KGB, and his father received a 10-year prison sentence, and then supposedly Morozov's family beat him to death, and so he actually became a Soviet hero. There were songs written about him. There were statues built to this 13-year-old kid who informed on his own father. That obviously is paralleled in 1984. In Oceania, your mind is not your own. You have these massive surveillance state apparatuses that have been built. And that, again, is paralleled by what the Soviet Union did. And the goal of the surveillance in the Soviet Union was not just to keep track of people, because they didn't actually have the ability to process all the material they were taking in.
True.
The idea was that everybody knew that they were being watched at all times. That inherently changes everybody's behavior. When you feel like you are on guard all the time, you start to shy away from exercising your freedom. This obviously has...
Okay, where does this idea come from? Let's think about what he's saying here. Let me just run it back real quick.
Are on guard all the time, at all times. That inherently changes everybody's behavior. The idea was that everybody knew that they were being watched at all times. That inherently changes everybody's behavior. When you feel like you are on guard all the time, you start to shy away from exercising your freedom. This obviously has some weak...
Interesting. It's almost the same parallels. Like,
what do you got? What do you think?
So it's kind of interesting because there's this theory that Ben Shapiro is pushing that says that schools are transing their kids. Now, I would hesitate to say...
I wasn't going to go there. I'm going all the way back to...
See, I'm
going all the way back to, this is Abrahamic religious thought, that God is everywhere and God is always watching you. Right?
Yes, that's one way.
So this is a strict institution that's used by churches and Abrahamic people of the punishment of hell. But the thing is that being a Jew, he believes this concept that he's being watched at all times. He is already submitting to something.
Yeah. Interesting, because I was going to say that it's kind of a polar opposite to what he's using as fuel to push this thing that he's pushing, which is that acceptance was coming, and people were more comfortable being like, hey, I feel this way. And now he's trying to reverse it in the same way, which is like restricting people's freedom and thus making people more afraid to do it. It's kind of the same thing, not in like a philosophical, but more of a an actual sort of physical repercussion of what he is actually doing, which would be exactly what he's talking about, which is fear making it harder for people to express who they are.
Because they're being watched.
Because they're being watched by people like Ben Shapiro, who will, or libs of TikTok is a better example, who will go out of their way to specifically signpost people.
Well, the thing is that those people are willingly put themselves out there, and these people have the same opinions with revenge porn. Oh, you don't want naked pictures of you to spread? Keep your legs closed. Don't be a slut. Don't send them. It's all about, well, that's your problem. You made bad choices. But we're always going to make good choices because we act as if God is watching.
Yeah, because we're religious.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Or echoes in the modern social media era, where you feel like if you say anything, then people are going to come after you and destroy you, right? We can feel sort of the faint echoes of Orwell all throughout our society, whether we're talking about the surveillance state or whether we are talking about social media mobbings or what.
So the surveillance state, that was very much a 9/11 thing. But as far as like the surveillance state goes, why do you need a Google thermostat, bro? These types of products that you're putting in your smart home, paranoia that thinks the government is watching you, but really the data that is really being taken from us is done in a capitalistic manner. And this is why a lot of my communist principles revolve around us being able to profit off our own data that's being used because it's our property. Is your digital self your own property? Is there such thing as like a digital enslavement? Who owns your digital self?
Well, I guess you signed it away.
Yeah, right? With the agreement.
You can't use them without assigning it. So it's coercion.
Indentured servitude type thing. I would like to see basically those types of practices, if not get kicked back on a universal basic income type thing where you make money off data. And you do see that. So like, why are TVs so cheap now?
Because they give away data.
Exactly. So you do get cutbacks from that economically, which is that part I'm fine with. It could also be if anything uses data that makes a profit, it gets taxed high as well. It can also be on that end where it's less communist and more capitalist, because taxes are capitalist, whether the libertarians like it or not.
Whether we're talking about people informing on each other for mob rule, right? So, you know, the way that historian Robert Conquest talked about the Stalin era, he said, to die, to lose your loved ones is bad enough. To be forced to denounce your father or husband in the hope of saving the rest of the family, and in general, to be compelled in public to express joy at the whole bloodbath, may be thought worse still. Truth almost perished. This was the surveillance state. That's Big Brother is watching. Then you get to the actual slogans. War is peace. So the basic idea here is that when you have a suppressed population, you must go to war. You must, because you have to direct that ire somewhere else. And you see this in totalitarian states all over the globe. North Korea is constantly being aggressive with South Korea, not because they actually hope to win a war with
North Korea is not going to war. Why would you use an example like that?
It's not about war, though. That's the thing. It's about this facade that they're the enemy. You've got to keep the what is it, the 3 minutes of hate or whatever it is?
Orwell is all about the horseshoe theory, right? So we're going to give two examples here. Hitler, the whole thing is like, we're actually oppressed. And if we just take back everything, then we'll be, it'll be a world for us where we can live in harmony and build a society for us. That's the fascist side. The second side, you have the Taliban and the French Revolution. Their revolutionary ideals are to use destruction and totalitarian to bring about submission and peace in a lawless society.
Yeah.
A totalitarian society has a fundamental belief that there needs to be a fear, whether it's fear of the government, fear of God, both. Ben being, again, Abrahamic religious here, should watch where he's going.
That the bad guys live on the south side of the border. The same thing with China vis-a-vis, for example, Taiwan and Hong Kong. Same thing, for example, with Iran, which is constantly driving its citizens' ire at Israel or the Palestinian Authority. And whenever you have Russia is a good example of this, right? You need territorial ambition in order to make excuses to your citizens for why you are a terrible government and why they have a terrible living standard. And so Emmanuel Goldstein in 1984 is the stand-in. Now, he's actually a stand-in for Trotsky in 1984, and pretty clearly a stand-in for Trotsky, because Trotsky was used as sort of the all-purpose whipping boy for the Soviet Union during the Stalin regime. Everybody who was an enemy of Stalin was treated as quote-unquote a Trotskyite and then targeted. But the idea, of course, is that perpetual war allows you to push all of the ire of your population abroad.
Like a Republican in name only.
And go after all those other people. Now, here's where you get into Orwell's failure to understand actually socialism and communism, because he actually didn't understand socialism and communism on an economic level. There's a huge portion of the book. It's actually the dullest portion of the book, where he gets a hold of Goldstein's pamphlet and he reads the pamphlet. And the pamphlet is just straight Trotsky. It's pretty much an open paraphrase of The Revolution Betrayed by Trotsky. And that The Revolution Betrayed basically says communism is good, Stalin is bad. And you hear the same thing here. Right? The idea in the Goldstein pamphlet is that the reason that the state has to constantly go to war is because if it were not for the state going to war, they couldn't get rid of all of their excess wealth. And getting rid of the excess wealth, sinking it to the bottom of the sea, as Orwell puts it, keeps the people in misery. And keeping the people in misery is the goal, because if they're in misery, then it prevents them from being able to rise up. Now, that's not true. Okay, communism keeps people in misery because it inherently destroys all the wealth. Soviet Union did not need to go to war with surrounding countries in order to destroy its surplus wealth. It had no surplus wealth. It was an impoverished country masquerading as a first world nation.
Analysis of society was. That was appalling.
The Soviet Union was destroyed by Germany. They had zero economic recovery. So if you look at Germany's motivations for World War II, like the popular, you can get really, really niche into this, but the popular thing is that the Treaty of Versailles was too abusive to Germany, right?
Yeah.
That's largely what's attributed
the victim complex. That's what started it.
Yeah. Oh, well, and then you look at the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union didn't get a Marshall Plan. It didn't get a bailout. It didn't get punished necessarily the way Germany did. It was kind of just as fucked at the end of the day. So if you really think about it, the ability to make a recovery, the Russian government today, if the Russian government was the way it was today, went through what happened with Stalin in power still, it would not be able to recover the way, like, they went to space at the same time the Americans did. Like, they were putting rockets in space at the same time the Americans were. They got no recovery bailouts after that. They had to completely rebuild themselves from the ground up. I think that's a very strong testament to how powerful the ideas of communism can be, even with someone like Stalin at the helm. And you have the immediately de-Stalinization after that, the Khrushchev era. There's almost like, because of the way it's been, there's almost like a submissive nature distilled on people, and Putin has now aggravated that even more to make completely uninvolved with politics, where people are just completely, it's just the way it is. They don't care to change anything. Nothing can change.
Yeah.
Nation.
Interesting.
And then you get to the second slogan: freedom is slavery. So again, the idea here is that to be free is to actually be a slave. To be fully free means that you are a slave to your own impulses, and only when you are liberated from individualism and you are subsumed under the rubric of the state can you experience true freedom. Now, in order to do that, you have to give up your own mind. And this brings us to ignorance is strength, which is the third slogan.
We haven't been paid in 2 weeks, and we want our wages.
Wages? You want to be wage slaves? Answer me that.
No.
No, of course not. Well, what makes wage slaves? Wages. I want you to be free. Remember, there's nothing like liberty, except Collier's in the Saturday Evening Post. Be free, my friends, one for all and all for me, and me for you, and 3 for 5, and 6 for a quarter.
Okay. That was Groucho Marx. Another Marx, but he was presenting the exact same concept under hypercapitalism.
Yeah, which we're saying.
Well, Ben is presenting it here under communism. The idea of like an extreme municipality where you don't, it's like you don't even have to work. You're free then because you're fully taken care of by someone else.
Yeah, usually the state in communist cases.
Yeah, and I think that's unrealistic because people who get to that level are probably like heavily disabled.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion, but it's like, and this is where anarchy comes into it, right? If everyone supports each other, then you really only have to work. Well, you're not even working.
Well, the thing is that people are always gonna argue about where their money's being spent.
Yeah.
So that's why taxes is beneficial, because it's kind of like it blindfolds people, and it's almost like it forces them to take care of each other. They just
Yeah.
bureaucrat everything. Also, America should not have to do their taxes. It should just be like Australia, where it's like automatic. That's how you really
Yeah.
get. That's how you really appease people, right there.
That when you give up your own mind to the state, then you find strength, because now you are united with everybody else. You've been merged into the great collective. And the key to this, and this is, I think, Orwell's best point in the whole book, I think his best point is this. The key to this is the pushing of subjectivism, the pushing of the idea that you can create reality within your own mind. And this is what is constantly being pushed by O'Brien. O'Brien, of course, is the emissary of the state.
You can create reality within your own mind. That is the thing. Oh, this is so true. Like, people live in their own realities. This is Alan Watts. The person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about but thoughts, so they live in a world of illusions.
Yeah. It's called Tankies.
Who is trying to brainwash Winston, right? And Smith talks about this, right? He says, what was terrifying was not that they would kill you for thinking otherwise than that 2 + 2 = 4, but that they might be right. For after all, how do we know that 2 + 2 make 4? Or that the force of gravity works? Or that the past is unchangeable? If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and if the mind itself is controllable, what then? So the idea is that you destroy all objective truth. And once you've destroyed all objective truth, all that is left is the subjective. And then when you apply pressure to the subjective mind, what you do is you destroy freedom.
No, Ben.
Objective truth to a religious person is not objective truth.
Okay, first of all, he doesn't understand science, for starters. So these are some high level ideas. We have to keep in mind Einstein and the train, right? How he comes up with the speed of light, and the theory of relativity, right? These are new concepts at the time. Quantum physics is the hot thing right now. So I don't remember all the stuff, right? But isn't the fourth dimension technically time?
Theoretically,
right? And so
I'm not 100% on that.
So a fifth dimensional object can travel backwards through times, and those are what are called tachyons, right?
Sure.
So the theory is behind this is that it takes the quantum science and stuff like that, how like time, where we think about how if you have something that weighs with negative mass, it would reach its destination before it left.
Yes.
These mind-breaking concepts that you're using science to almost break reality here, reality and time. So our memory, we know how fallible memory is. We talk about this all the time. So what is the past? So when you think about your past, when you exist in your own head, you remove some of yourself from the physical world. You're not paying 100% attention to the physical world. You are living inside your head. You are inside another reality at that point. You're technically time traveling, right? But it's not like you're using tachyons to access back memories, right? So it's not actually time traveling. It's a time traveling in a state of reality you have created inside your own mind. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I've never thought about it like that.
So this is one of the big things. One, because my past triggers me with anxiety of why I'm against thinking about the past and dwelling on the past, but also why I'm against thinking about the future, because the future is the same way. Because you can't see the future, and Raisin in the Sun, Requiem for a Dream, these types of things. You focus on your dreams and lose sight of what's around you. You live inside your head. You only think about the future. That's what we're talking about here. It's not like what he's saying, which let's refresh real here.
That you destroy, or that the past is unchangeable. If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and if the mind itself is controlled.
See, they do though. Your past only exists in your own mind.
Controllable. What then? So the
because
idea
already the past that exists in your mind is not the real past, because you're already altering it.
Yeah, because it's what's the term? Perception bias, something like that.
The idea is that you destroy all objective truth. And once you've destroyed all objective truth, all that is left is the subjective. And then when you apply pressure to the subjective mind, what you do is you destroy freedom. Because again, you can think yourself into anything is the premise here. Now, there is an external world, right? There are facts, there are realities.
This is where you get into the cyberpunk stuff, where it's like, what is a body? Can you download your mind? these ideas are already there in Orwell. And that's why I said, like, a lot of cyberpunk is evolutions of these ideas. And these ideas are not even original to Orwell.
It is very important for us to cling to the facts of life. If we do not cling to the facts of life, and if we believe that all reality is made up inside of our tiny pea brains, then it's
all reality is made up inside your tiny pea brain. That's how it works. Nobody is seeing the same thing. It's not like some people see a blue and you see a green.
Unless you're colorblind.
You can show somebody a painting, and everyone is going to have a different interpretation of that painting.
Yeah.
There'll be things where people draw different meanings from the exact same input. You have the exact
look at 1984.
Very easy for people to exert control, to use the power of the culture, to use the power of the government to compel you to think things. Because after all, reality is created in your brain. It is not an external thing out there for you to discover. This is Orwell's great point. The most dangerous philosophical thing you can get into is radical subjectivism, and that is where we are as a society. And he keeps hammering that home, right? He hammers that home over and over and over in 1984. Right? It's described in the book as, quote, every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book has been rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street and building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and that process is continuing day by day, minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. So what is the hope here? Right? It's a pretty hopeless book. It's a pretty grim book, right? By the end, Winston, who has fought back against the state, essentially by taking the lover. And again, I think that is a misstatement of how you fight back against totalitarianism. It really is not about emotional subjectivism. It's about vital institutions that you build on top of your emotional feeling for other people. So institutions like marriage, institutions like church, you need those to fight the state. Otherwise, they can be wiped away. Winston falls in love with Julia. They have a relationship. The state destroys it anyway. So he says that he has hope in the proles.
I think
and Trotsky
the conclusion we're coming to is that the story in 1984 is dog shit. And nobody should care about it and what the characters say. And he should have just written a theory book and it would have gone over much better. 1984 is terrible. Nobody should read it.
He has hope for the lower classes because the lower classes still grip tight to their personal relationships. It really isn't about that. It's about the fact that elites in society have a nasty tendency to tear down the institutions that are necessary in order to allow life to continue normally. And the proles grip those institutions tightly. It turns out that William F. Buckley once suggested...
Aren't conservatives the one gripping institutions?
...that he'd rather be governed by the first 200 names in the Boston phone book than the faculty at Harvard. The reason for that is because the faculty at Harvard think themselves into the belief that they can get rid of all the institutions. Whereas normal people, they live within those institutions. They live marriage. They live family. They live school. They live church. They live local community. Those are the things that are absolutely necessary, right? That really is the hope. There's one other point that I think Orwell is wrong about. There's a lot he's right about. There's one other point that I think Orwell is wrong about in the book. And that is this. He suggests, through O'Brien, right, who is the emissary of the state, that the reason that this is being done is for pure power. It's almost a nihilistic desire for power. It is not about some sort of higher cause. I don't think that's right. I don't think that communists actually believe in just pure power rule. I think it's actually, forgive the phrase, a slur against Stalin. I don't think that Stalin was just about promoting his own power. He actually was a utopian.
Hold on. We really need to address this, is that they weren't communists. They were authoritarian socialists, which was the bridging point between capitalism and communism.
But there is something to be said about communism and its initial growth model for industrialization over capitalism, which normally, like, capitalism's industrialization model, especially nowadays, is environmentally dangerous. There's a lot of things where a pro-communist model for growth would be better for a lot of things. Understanding that we still trade and exist in a capitalist world market. You can organize communist and have communist blocks inside your own country, right? But at the end of the day, your exports and your GDPs
is capitalist.
Has to do that. And you can see that with, like, the Basque region of Spain.
The other
spoiler alert, I have never read 1984 and I never will.
The other thing is that these states, these communist states, they're state capitalists. They're capitalist systems, but organized differently. Like that's the real truth of this whole thing. Is like they were never not capitalists. They just owned everything and determined where they went.
That's more of corruption, you know? I don't think it's worth framing the Soviet Union as capitalist or anything like that. I think it's fine recognizing them as communist, but understanding that, you know how I always say that if America was communist, nothing would have been different.
Yeah.
Right? Like the fundamental things that happened in the world would have still happened.
It's also the means justify the ends idea as well, which is always fucked up. That's mostly what the communist states were, is it's the ends justify the means, so they can kill as many people as they possibly need. Because at the end of the day, it's all for the betterment of the people or the state or the proletariat or whatever the fuck bullshit.
Like I said, I think this has more to do to replace the fear of God. So, and like I say this all the time, but the words Lord, the reason why we call them landlords come back to pre-Judaism language. That's not even the word Lord, but it's just how it's been translated over the years that it's meant the same thing.
Just to touch on the word Lord as well, I mean, look at the British Parliament. It's the House of Lords and the House of Commons.
Yeah, because it's land, right?
Yeah.
And so this goes back to one of the fundamental things of roles in the church and clergy in history is that they controlled a lot of the municipal public land. So this is how the church would raise money, is they would, you know, charge shepherds. This is why there's the theme of the shepherds, why the God always appears to shepherds. They're saying that they have an authority from something else over you, like some magical thing gives them the authority over you. So these people say, fuck you. You know, we fight wolves all day with slings. Send your Goliath. Go fuck yourself. You know, Judaism is fundamentally founded in a rebellion against land ownership. The word for landowner was El. And so God appears. He says, I am the Lord, right? This is why he's saying, I am the Lord. And this is why Israel is called Israel, because they don't use God's name, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is like, he's like, I am your Lord now. And that's where it comes from, is that Judaism is so old that it has this fundamental moment in these, some of the first like cuneiform scripts of these words that existed, some of our first written language. We can trace it all the way back to land ownership being the issue here. So the idea that Marx is somehow revolutionary for being anti-landlord, I don't think Ben has read the Bible.